Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Councillor Glenn Gower. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this information session about 6015 Fernbank Road. Before we start, I'd like to introduce everyone who you see on your screen right now. We have Kathy Rigas joining us. She's the planner for this file from the City of Ottawa, along with Jeffrey Wren, who's also with the City of Ottawa. Jeffrey is a co-op student attending University of Waterloo and co-oping with the city's planning department. And we have Pierre Dufresne and Melissa Cote, both from Tartan, and they'll be joining us for the presentation and also to answer some resident questions as we go. So how it's going to work tonight, we'll have a short presentation from Kathy, setting up the planning process and where this application and this revision fits in, and then a presentation from Melissa. And then we'll have the opportunity for residents to ask questions or share your comments. There's a few ways you can do that. If you're joining us on Zoom, as many people are, you can use the Q&A function that you see on the bottom of your screen. So you can type in your question or comment, and I will share that with the different people on this call in our Q&A session. If you'd like to talk, we can bring you in like a call-in radio show. Just raise your hand and we can go to you with a comment later on. And if you're watching on Facebook, because we're streaming this live on Facebook, you can type a comment underneath the video, and I'll be watching those too for your questions later on. Now, before we get going, I want to share one thing with you, just so people are aware of this. This is my website, glenngower.ca, and I wanted to show you a couple of things. First of all, as the development tab up at the top of the page. So there's quite a few development files in the approval stage, and there's quite a few developments, as you know, from all the construction ongoing. So this is a map that you can access showing information about any development. Some of these are already approved, some of them are on hold, some of them are active, like the one we're considering this evening. And if you scroll down, you'll see a list of all of them, plus a list of updated public meetings that we have scheduled, updates about the different individual files. So it's a really good resource if you're looking for more information about what's happening in the community. And the other thing I want to show you is where you can sign up for my email newsletter, which is also right up here. So if you don't receive it yet, please sign up with your email address. We send this out every Wednesday, although this week it'll be out on a Thursday because of the Victoria Day long weekend. So with that, I would like to hand things over to Kathy for her presentation. Kathy, over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Glenn. My name is Kathy Rigas. So I'm the planner in Development Review West, who is handling this particular application. So I will go over the planning process. Next slide, please. So first of all, I'll just give a quick recap. This application is for a revision to a plan of subdivision and an application for a zoning bylaw amendment. So what is a plan of subdivision? That's the planning process that divides a parcel into lots and blocks for development and creates all the public streets. So it can include the lots and blocks for residential development. There may be park blocks, school blocks for commercial, stormwater management pond block. So all of those are laid out on the draft plan of subdivision. And the stage that we call draft approval, that's where we've gone through the circulation process. We've obtained comments from 50 plus technical agencies, and we've generally resolved any issues there may have been with the proposal. And draft approval establishes the general layout of the subdivision in terms of how the streets will be laid out, where all these different blocks are for the different land uses. And after draft approval, the subdivider moves on to the second stage, which is where we do a lot of the detailed design. So that's where they do the detailed servicing plans, streetscape plans for all the streets. And we prepare a subdivision agreement, which identifies all the different requirements the developer has to abide by, and including financial requirements, and they sign the legal agreement. So that's just a very quick overview of what a plan of subdivision involves. Next slide, please. And what is a zoning amendment? The zoning bylaw for the city establishes provisions for how every parcel in the city will develop. So the zoning of a property is what establishes what the permitted uses are, what the setbacks are, what the building height permitted is. And if someone wants to develop a property that deviates from the current zoning provisions, they have the ability to apply for what's called a zoning bylaw amendment, or what's often called a rezoning. So a zoning bylaw amendment can deal with adding a new permitted land use, or it may affect what we call the performance standards. So they may want to vary the lot size, the building height, setback, or other particular factors. So that's just a quick overview of the two processes that we're dealing with here. Next slide, please. So this just shows a very bird's eye view of the property. So 6015, 21, and 41 Fernbank Road. So this is the site. It's located on the north side of Fernbank Road. To the west is the existing Stittsville community. To the north, there's an environmental area, the wooded area that you see, and Cardell Rec Center at the corner of Abbott and Shea Road. To the east is another subdivision application by Kavanaugh, and then to the east of that would be Shea Road. So the parcel is in that general location. Next slide, please. So this is just a more zoomed in version of the site. So it shows the lotting pattern of the houses in the neighborhood nearby, the treed area to the north, the Kavanaugh subdivision, which is just showing pretty much a slide, please. So when we're talking about planning policy, the highest level of document is what's called the city's official plan. So the official plan establishes a framework for the entire city, and everything is designated with a particular designation, and each one allows certain types of development. So in this case, the site, which is shown outlined in red, is yellow. So yellow stands for general urban area, and that permits a full range of housing types, from singles, semi-detached, townhouses, and apartments. It also permits a whole range of commercial and open space or institutional uses. Next slide, please. So this is just an excerpt of the city's, from the official plan again, and it shows the road network. So in this case, it shows Stittsville, Maine, Fernbank Road, and the site would be located just to the left of this green dotted line. That would be the extension of Cope Drive, and so the site is shown there. And Cope Drive, which runs along its eastern boundary, is shown as a proposed collector. Next slide, please. And this is the Fernbank Community Design Plan. So the Fernbank Community Design Plan was approved by City Council back in 2009, and it developed a framework for the entire area between Stittsville and Terry Fox Drive north of Fernbank Road, extending up to Hazeldean Road. So overall, it set the framework for a community of approximately 10 or 11,000 households with a range of different land uses. And that was encapsulated in this, what we call the Fernbank CDP. So within the Fernbank CDP, the different colors refer to different designations in the CDP. And this one was the light yellow, so that was low density residential, which is intended to permit either detached, semi-detached, or townhouses. Next slide, please. So this is the draft approved plan of subdivision. So this particular site had an application for a plan of subdivision in 2013, as well as for an application for zoning bylaw amendment. So after the circulation issues were resolved, this was the draft approved plan of subdivision. So as I mentioned earlier, this lays out the road network and the lotting fabric for the subdivision. So it shows where all the lots are where the park is, how the streets will be laid out. So this is what was approved in 2014. So this has what we call status as a draft approved plan of subdivision. And along with this draft plan, there is a set of what we call draft plan conditions. And that's all the various specifications that the subdivider has to satisfy before they can move on to the final stage, which is called the registration. That's where we legally create the lots. So one of the components of this plan of subdivision was a linear park, which runs along the west boundary of the site. So it ran behind the existing houses, and it was approximately 10.9 meters wide. So it's shown along the bottom of this plan. So that's identified as a block on the plan, and the zoning was put in place that's zoned open space. Next slide, please. So what's the subdivision revision that's being requested? So this gives you a sense geographically of what change is being proposed. So as we described, the existing houses would be located along the bottom of this plan. The linear park is the first, that thin block you can see along the western property line. And the area outlined in red would be revised. Before it was lots for singles and, or it could be semi-detached. So the area within the red line would be changed to turn it into larger blocks for townhouses. So nothing else in the plan would change. The street layout is all staying exactly the same. It's simply a change from a certain number of lots to blocks. And in subdivision terms, a lot is for either a semi-detached, like a pair of semi-detached, or for a single. And in this case, they turn into slightly larger blocks, which would accommodate, could be 3 or 4 townhouses. So this shows you geographically where the change is contemplated. Next slide, please. And in terms of zoning, zoning was implemented at the time of the draft approval in 2014. So an R3Z, R3 zone permits detached, semi-detached, and townhouses. And where there's a number in brackets after it, that means there's a site-specific exception applicable to that particular R3 zone. So in this case, the land that we're talking about, where the subdivision exception would be, it's called exception 2238, and that prohibits all uses except detached and semi-detached. So in the typical R3Z zone, that would permit townhouses, but in this case, there was an exception that prohibited townhouses. Next slide, please. So the zoning request is to remove that exception 2238 within this area outlined in red. So it would revert back to what we call the parent zone, the typical R3Z, which allows singles, semis, and the townhouses. Next slide, please. So that was circulated, and I received comments from a number of people. And I'd say by far the main comment that I received was asking whether the linear park was still going to be part of the subdivision, or whether this was affected by the rezoning and the subdivision revision, and it's not. So this air photo shows the location of that linear park in yellow. And on the zoning map, that strip has been zoned O1, which means parks and open space. So it doesn't permit residential development. It is a park, and that is not changing. So the subdivision plan shows it as approximately a 10-meter strip along the, I said east, it's actually the west property line of the subdivision, and it's located behind the existing houses. And so the linear park, as I've just said, is unaffected by this requested revision. Next slide, please. And the other comment or question that I had frequently from people was asking about Samuel Mann Avenue, which is a connection. There would be a connection from Samuel Mann. It would be extended into the subdivision to connect with the closest street, which was called street number 6. And so there is no change to what was proposed by the original subdivision. And in the subdivision conditions from 2014, what the condition said was that Samuel Mann would be open only to emergency vehicles and pedestrians for an interim period. And there would be bollards installed to prevent regular traffic from accessing it. And the condition said that the road would be opened, and this is the wording from the condition. The road would be opened once major roads in the Fernbank CDP lands have been completed and traffic patterns have been established, including the opening of Robert Grant Avenue from Fernbank Road to Abbott Street. So at the time of that condition, Robert Grant Avenue wasn't completed. And so the intent was that Samuel Mann would remain closed until such time as Robert Grant Avenue had opened. And that has already been completed and the road is open, as everyone knows. And so Samuel Mann Avenue was to be built to Street 6. That's the closest street in the new subdivision as part of the phase 1 work. So that was intended to be done early in the subdivision, not as a later stage. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process and the steps that we take, and what happens next with the subdivision revision is we'll continue to gather public comments and any issues will be resolved. And then once the issues are resolved, we revise the draft plan and the conditions of approval are finalized. So I would say that 90% of the conditions of approval will be exactly the same as what was approved by the original draft approval. We may have some minor changes that come about as a result of this revision. And then a staff report is prepared and a decision is made by our development review manager with concurrence from the ward councillor. So both the owner and the ward councillor have to concur with those conditions of draft approval, which is the whole suite of conditions that go with the draft plan. And then after that, notice of decision is sent to all members of the public who had provided me with comments. Next slide, please. In terms of what happens next with the zoning bylaw amendment, again, we'll continue to gather comments and if issues will be resolved. And then once the subdivision has draft approval, we'll move forward with a staff report to planning committee. So we prepare a report to planning committee with a recommendation and planning committee considers our staff report and they make a recommendation to council. So the staff are simply the recommenders of the approval. Planning committee makes a decision and they make a recommendation to city council. The next step is that council enacts a bylaw which changes the zoning. And then there would be a further notice of what's called notice of bylaw passing. And that's mailed out to all owners within 120 meters of the subject site or anyone else beyond that distance who provided me with comments. So following the notice, there's a 20-day appeal period. And at the end of that, there are no appeals, then the zoning bylaw comes into effect. So that's basically the information for process. And now I'll turn it over to Melissa to talk a little more about the specifics of the proposal.
Oh, okay. You can switch to the next slide. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So I'll start off by providing a bit more detail about our development and what has changed from our initial approval. So on the plan of subdivision, what we added were townhouse blocks along the eastern portion of the site in the locations outlined in red and green. These locations are primarily adjacent to Cope Drive, which is the collector and road access into the site. So in red is where semi-detached units were replaced by townhouses, and in green where single detached units were replaced by townhouses. This also resulted in pushing some semi-detached units into the more central portion of the site, which I outlined in blue. So we're now proposing to build 236 singles, 144 semi-detached units, and 250 townhouse units for a total of 630. Our intent was really to replace about half of our semi-detached lots with townhouse blocks. In my table there, I do have a column showing the number of units that would be permitted under the current zoning because townhouses are permitted along Cope Drive. And considering the current zoning, the overall increase air site from what the zoning permits is a total of 70 units. So next slide. So on this slide, I'm showing which locations would require a zoning amendment to accommodate the townhouse units. So outlined in red is the area where a zoning amendment is required to allow for those townhouses. And then outlined in blue is where the proposed singles, semis, and townhouses are shown, as shown on the revised plan, would be permitted under the current zoning. And so what I really want to highlight here before moving on to the next slide is that the intent of the current zoning exception for having lower density units adjacent to the existing community to the west is still being maintained. There is a clear transition. Oops, my apologies. There is a clear transition with our higher density product being located in the eastern portion of the site along the collector road to the lowest density product being located in the west and north sections of the plan. And this is unchanged from the approved plan. So next slide. So why are we requesting a change to the approved draft plan? Well, there has been a change in market demand since the plan was first approved in 2014. There is now less demand for semi-detached units than there is for townhouses. And one of the reasons is that purchasers are able to buy townhouse units with similar square footage and layouts at a lower price point than semi-detached units, which makes the townhouses more desirable, especially now that townhouses are selling at a starting price of $700,000. It really leads us to the affordability, which is becoming a critical issue in Ottawa, especially over the years. A healthy housing support factors in the ability of new homeowners to enter into the market. Being able to offer a mix of unit types, including townhouses, with a range of price points is important. Increasing the number of units on this site increases the housing supply in the community, which will contribute to a stable housing market, provide new homeowners with the ability to afford home. So slide. So an important question to ask is why an extra 70 units to this site? The community wants trees to be protected and retained possible. I'd like to make it clear that there is no impact or change to the proposed park, the proposed so trees will be protected in the rear yard of lots backing onto the natural environment area with a 5-meter no-touch zone in the rear yard. Trees within the park block will be incorporated into the park design and will only be removed where necessary to provide park amenities. And trees within the linear parkland will be retained as much as possible. The stone dust pathway will be designed in a manner that's going to maximize the number of trees to be retained in this area. We understand that this is a priority and it will be a priority for us as well. So I also wanted to emphasize that there is no change to the road or planned access into the site. So vehicles are not going to have access through the existing community west. All site access will be from Cope Drive via Fernbank Road and Shea Road. Samuel Mann Avenue will remain closed to vehicles. The city may choose to open Samuel Mann Avenue in the future, but this is fully at the city's discretion. And lastly, we did update our transportation study, which confirmed that the proposed increased number of homes would not have an impact on adjacent road network and the overall community. So that concludes my presentation, but I know Pierre Dufresne and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Melissa, and thanks to Kathy as well for the presentations. And I know Pierre has been busy answering some of the Q&A questions that have been coming through, but just for the benefit of people who are watching on Facebook or who'll be watching later on YouTube, I'm going to just read a few of these ones out and look to get some answers. The first one, we've had a number of questions about Samuel Mann Avenue, and I just would like Melissa or Pierre to just confirm what is the plan for Samuel Mann in the short term and potentially in the long term as well.
You're on mute, Melissa.
Of course. So sorry, just to clarify, so Samuel Mann Avenue will be closed to vehicle traffic with the exception of emergency vehicles. And that plan is going to be in place until, from what I understand, the subdivision is fully built out. At that time, it's at the city's discretion if they want to re-examine the possibility of opening Samuel Mann Avenue to vehicular traffic, but that would be at a date down the line.
And I can confirm the city has no plans to open that. It's not to say it can never happen, but I think what I'm hearing or from what I understand, it's very much dependent on future traffic patterns and along Fernbank, along the future Cope, around Robert Grant, how the whole area gets developed. But certainly for the foreseeable future, we're not going to see that Samuel Mann open to anything but bikes, pedestrians, and emergency vehicles if required. There's a question about blasting from Dan. How are you ensuring that that the homes of current residents are safe from blasting? Pierre, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm getting carried away with the typing.
Oh.
Yeah, so typically what we do, I mean, we're mandated to do our contractor is mandated to do pre-blast surveys of all the adjacent houses that might be affected by vibration. They'll have vibration monitors in place while they're doing the blasting. They're legally liable for any damage. And I also put a note that in my experience where we've done a considerable amount of blasting, including across the street on the south side of Fernbank, in our Davidson subdivision, we've never had a claim against us.
Dan, can you also, sorry, Pierre, also a second question from Dan was around the elevation of the homes. What's the elevation of the homes as compared to what's there existing on Liard and Caribou?
Yeah, so we haven't done a detailed design yet, and you know, it obviously depends on the existing elevations of the homes that are already built and how the topography works. Typically, our site will be raised about a meter to 1.5 meters, and so there could be a grade raise. I don't know what the relationship is between on our side of the property line and on the Liard, though the houses on the Liard, but I think that the you know 9 whatever meter buffer will help mitigate against any of that, especially since all the trees will remain as much as possible. The only trees that will really be cut are dead ones, which create a hazard, and those that will be required to build the 1.5 meter wide stone dust pathway. And of course, we'll want to meander that pathway where it'll have as little impact on the tree canopy as possible.
Okay, there's a question from Debbie. Actually, there were several questions about the impact from traffic from increasing the number of homes that would be in this neighborhood. But I'll read the one from Debbie just because I think she states it well. She doesn't feel adding more homes is proper in this area since the main street of Stittsville is already overloaded from traffic and there are no townhouses in the area. You mentioned Melissa and Pierre, you've both mentioned the traffic impact assessment and that the traffic impact assessment shows little impact. But can you explain how, even though you're adding dozens more homes, how you've determined that there's little impact from traffic from the additional homes?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. You know, first of all, as we've been talking, there's not going to be any traffic going onto the local roads adjacent to the subdivision. They'll all be going out onto Fernbank and Shea Road, and then seeking the easiest, most likely seeking the easiest direction to their destinations that the drivers are going. Quite often that'll be up to the Queensway, going up towards Iber and then up Huntmark, sorry. And our traffic study shows that there won't be, well, the way that they measure the traffic volume is at peak impact, so that they can measure congestion impacts on congestion during rush hour. And the majority of traffic in our studies are going north and east, with we're going west towards Main Street during the peak hour. And of course, Fernbank and Shea Road are collector roads and will be improved and upgraded as time goes on.
Yeah, I would suspect, I don't want to suggest there's no impact, but in terms of the impact from additional traffic, it would likely be heading east down Fernbank, or if it's going north, would head on the future Cope Road connecting to Robert Grant, rather than using Stittsville, Maine as a north-south, just because of the additional road infrastructure that's being built here. We may come back to that topic, but I want to keep going.
Just sorry, an example. Okay.
Go ahead, Pierre. Go ahead.
Yes, just as an example, our traffic study, and they use modeling, engineering modeling, 255 vehicles will go, 42 would go west towards Main Street.
Okay.
And 600 going east toward, basically.
There were a few questions about the linear park. So one from Taylor and one from Jeff. Taylor's question was about what that path is going to look like. And then from Jeff, will the existing trees be protected in that park corridor?
Yes, absolutely. Again, the intent is to retain as many trees as possible, healthy trees. Again, dead trees will have to be removed because they become a hazard. Remember, this pathway is an extension of the Trans-Canada Trail. That's all been spelled out in the community design plan, and that was intentional. And then the stone dust pathway will, as I said, will meander so that we can avoid cutting as many healthy trees as possible, and make it a great feature for the community.
I'm just looking for it here. I saw it earlier, but I'm not seeing it now. Oh, yes, here it is from Jeff. What is the plan for sidewalks along the streets within this subdivision? He asked specifically about Samuel and Mann, but I'm curious how far along you are in terms of the design for sidewalks for the rest of the streets here.
Yeah, that information.
Yeah, well, I believe in this subdivision, we are required to provide a sidewalk on one side of each local road. Really, we will place sidewalks where it's warranted, where it makes sense, where it's connections to park and parkland, along collector roads, or streets that lead out to collector roads. So there's a pedestrian plan that gets put in place, and so the sidewalks are implemented accordingly.
Okay. There's a question about traffic on Fernbank. Is there a plan to add traffic lights or crosswalks? So probably that would be Cope Road and Fernbank, because Cope Road crosses over to Edenwild on the other side. What's the status? Would there be a crosswalk or stoplight at that intersection? I know it's a little bit west technically of this subdivision.
Yeah, at Cope and Fernbank, there'll be a controlled stop with stop signs and turning lanes, so that the turning traffic won't hold up the straight through cut through traffic.
So it'd be stop signs. It could be signalized in the future if there's
in the future. The traffic impact study showed that signals were not warranted, and that's all based on mathematical formulas, as far as I am aware. And that could change in the future if warranted.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge there's a number of questions coming in. Well, not so much questions as they are comments. So, for example, from Jeff, noting he's suggesting increasing the width of the linear path could make up for the total difference in the number of units. Anyhow, there's a number of comments here, and I just want to let you know we're going to be capturing all these comments and sharing them with the planner, Kathy Rigas, so that she has access to those and can include them as part of the community comments for this. So thank you for the comments here. There's a very technical question from Dan, and I'm not sure if you can answer it on the spot here, Melissa or Pierre, but if you can't, we'll get a follow-up, which is what is the difference, what is the distance between the existing property line and the center of the pathway?
Yeah, fair question. I think that when we had our public meetings a number of years ago, there's some discussion to try and have the pathway offset away from the existing homes on the art. But really, it's going to have to be field proofed. We're going to, in order to retain the trees that we want to retain and identify those, there'll be a field walk with our landscape architect in the city, forestry people, and parks and recreational people, and we'll just basically have to lay it out in the field as we do so. And that pathway, the center of the pathway won't be any the same distance away from the existing houses in any two spots. Probably it'll just wind up and down. But there was a conscious discussion, or there will be an attempt to keep it as far east as possible, as practical.
Okay. There's a question from Lee about has the City of Ottawa or developers made allowance for the increasing volume of traffic on streets like Fernbank and Abbott? I can answer that quickly. The answer is to some extent, yes. So the road network that you see in this Fernbank area of Stittsville still is not complete, but they have contemplated quite a bit more traffic than you see now. Fernbank Road, there's no near-term plan to widen Fernbank or urbanize that. However, right now the city's going through a process of updating the transportation master plan, and that's the priority and planning document that sets out when roads are going to be built or upgraded. There'll be a number of opportunities for public feedback. Now, the last time that this transportation master plan was created or updated was 2013. And you can imagine how much the situation in Stittsville has changed over those 8 years. So this is a really good opportunity. There'll be a chance for the public to provide feedback and make sure that Stittsville's needs are heard by the transportation planners. And hopefully we can move up the schedule for upgrading a road like Fernbank as part of that process. So if you watch my website and email newsletter, I'll be sharing some of the opportunities for public feedback. We've already had a few surveys and engagement opportunities, and was really happy to see that Stittsville was one of the top wards that the city got feedback from on future transportation projects. So it's really, really good that people are able to get involved and share the feedback. It helps me advocate on behalf of residents as well. There's a question from someone about potentially in the future when Samuel Mann, if it gets open to vehicle traffic, would the safety of pedestrians and residents be supported? And I can say yes, that would be part of the process. Before that road could even be open, they'd be looking at the impact to not only on the volume of traffic, but also on safety concerns for cyclists and pedestrians, not only in this neighborhood, but also on the west side of the property along Liard, Caribou, Samuel Mann, and all of the existing streets. So that would be part of that review before any decision could be made about opening it. Here's a question from Kim. If this gets approved, will it lead you to applying for more townhouses in this subdivision? So Melissa or Pierre, if you want to take that one.
No, if we had a desire to build more townhomes, we would just apply for them right now. We wouldn't keep coming back. The reason that we are applying for this is because there has been a significant amount of time since we were last approved on this, whereas our plan is to be in the ground in 2022 with shovels building roads and housing. So we don't expect that the housing market would change drastically enough to cause us to want to get more townhomes. We feel we'll have the proper balance right now.
So maybe it's a good time to ask, what's your expected timeline for development if you get approval on this?
Yeah, we would be in the ground with building sewers, water mains, and roads in the first phase for paving, say September 1st, 2022, and house construction soon thereafter.
Okay. Question from Karen, what enforcement measures can be in place to prevent local traffic from passing through the emergency only section of Samuel Mann? I don't know, Kathy, if you have any thoughts on that or based on previous experience?
Well, typically there would be some sort of, there will be bollards that prevent general traffic. I don't know what the exact appearance would be that would allow the emergency vehicles, but that's part of the condition, was that there would be bollards or control that would prevent regular traffic. So I would think that it will be something that sometimes there's like, I know there's particular bollards that, for example, a fire truck can knock down. I don't know if that would apply to an ambulance, but that's something that will be taken into account. That's a question I had from one or two people, was what would this look like? But we don't have that information right now. We're at the stage of developing the draft conditions, and there was a condition written in 2014 to say pedestrian, cycle, and emergency vehicle only. So the actual engineering design of the intersection is still to be worked out. But I think, given the condition that it is restrictive, that it will be implemented in the most appropriate way. But I just don't have the final details right now.
Okay. And there's a later question about whose decision is it around opening Samuel Mann. That would be a decision of the city. As a councillor, I haven't been involved in a decision process around raising a closed road, opening a closed access like this. Compared to some similar things though that have come up, my assumption is it would involve public consultation, it would involve input from emergency services, involve input from the city's traffic team. It would also require concurrence from the city councilor, whoever that may be in future years before that can open. So there's quite a bit of process before it would switch from an emergency access to a general access, if that ever happens. There are also some questions about the transportation impact study. I'm going to share a link in the chat to where you can find that information. But Pierre or Melissa, can you just give an overview? When was the study done? Is that done by Tartan or by the city? How is it evaluated? Some more about just the process of transportation impact studies.
Sure. The traffic impact study is required for any type of application that we make, even if it's a townhouse site plan. Sometimes we'll have to do one. We get professional engineers, transportation engineers to do them. In this case, it was IBI. And it was submitted to the city to accompany the application. And of course, it's reviewed by the city traffic engineers at the same time to make sure that the conclusions and recommendations are suitable to the study. And I find that, traffic impact studies are very, very empirical in nature because of the assumed number of cars that they have coming out of a community, generated by a community, when they're going to be traveling, where they're going to be traveling, and what type of criteria is required before to provide for any upgrades to be able to manage that traffic. But it is all these studies are available online. We did our original study, of course, with the application and an addendum, not only to bring new conclusions as a result of the increased number of units, but also to conform with new standards that the city imposes on how these traffic studies are conducted.
Okay, so thank you. So that covers quite a few questions about the TIA, and I've shared a link to the actual traffic impact assessment in the chat for people who are on Zoom. If you're not watching on Zoom, you can find it if you go to glengower.ca and search for this development application. You'll see a link to the city's Dev Apps site. We've had a couple people raise their hands, so I want to go there. I see Rob. Rob, I'm going to allow you to talk, so you'll probably need to unmute, and then you can share your comment or ask your question for the panel.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Rob.
Great. Hi. Yeah, I was trying to interrupt while you were going through the topics because I had a question on a few, but just going back to the Samuel Mann thing, I think that's great the way, from what I've heard. My understanding was it would be an actual locked gate with, keys that would be provided somehow to emergency personnel. I don't know how that works, but that's, one of those sliding things. Okay, that was what was discussed at the time. My only concern there is if I look at that map that comes up, like it doesn't show that road as any different than any others. And then I have to go, wait a few slides, and then I see this little note hidden that it won't be open. There must be some way to show that's not a through road on an official map.
Yeah, what we show that's on a draft plan, it's really a legal plan. That survey is a legal plan. And there will be a road allowance dedicated to the city. And it will be a public road that will connect to Samuel Mann. It's really the function of it that we're discussing today. And whether it be gated or bollards, breakaway bollards, or what have you, there'll be a physical prohibition there to make sure that cars do not travel through. But that doesn't stop it from actually being a road or a road allowance.
Okay. Another quick topic on the blasting. So I've noticed the blasting from, I don't know what the other project is, but there's one that's going on right now. So we're feeling it here. And when I read through the documents, and I've talked to the gentleman who's in charge, nice chap and all that, but my understanding is, well, they didn't send notifications to people because they're outside of a 75-meter radius. Well, we're at 300 meters. This is going to be even closer. Like I'm thinking, we already know that the impact is higher than the 75 meters. Can we get ahead of this and send it to a bigger community up front when this happens, so that we don't have to go all discover this on our own,
Mm-hmm. There are several protocols, both I think from the industry as well as imposed by the city, about really zones of influence and what you do within those sort of concentric circles. But apart from that, I would generally send a note to the councillor's office and to the planner's office advising them of the schedule, the fact that the pre-surveys will be conducted and notices left with the residents. And then typically I see it on Councillor Gower's weekly newsletter when activities like this occur, that they'll announce it so that at least if you subscribe to his Facebook site or his newsletter, that you'll be aware. But we'll do what we need to do to make sure that notices are sent out and everybody understands what's going on within those zones of influence.
I think that's what I'm asking. I don't know. It seems like we're all on some big rock here, because you just feel everything. Like it's like you think an earthquake's coming, but it's feeling people way up far from me are feeling it too. And it's just maybe something's different, and rather than maybe the guidelines are great everywhere else, but we already know it's a problem. I'm just asking if we can make an exception and maybe just expand the actual sending. I get a note in the mail. It's a lot different than I got to go looking at sites. A lot of people don't pay attention.
Yeah, no, we'll note your comment, and we can also participate. We don't have to let the contractor do everything. If the contractor's duties and responsibilities are end in a certain place, we can still extend that beyond in terms.
Great.
Rob,
I'll give back the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I'll tell you, it's a frustration for me is dealing with the blasting. I mean, most new housing developments here in Stittsville involve some kind of blasting, but it's the province that has oversight, as well as the federal government, for some of the blasting. And for the most part, the builders and developers are very cooperative in sharing information. But it's a very minimal notification that's required. It's very hard to get follow-up. Most issues around construction, if you have an issue, you can call 311 and the city will deal with it. With blasting, because it's under provincial oversight, it's very, very hard as a council and as a city to be able to help residents. So it is a point of frustration. And I definitely, I know residents living in this area have had a lot of blasting to deal with in the last year as they've been working from home, especially. So we will try to communicate as much information in advance so people are aware of what's going on. We're coming up on our 8 p.m., so I want to try to get through some very quick questions and answers here. A few just comments that I'll noted. Jana suggests that the city should plant more trees along that buffer to create a more of a buffer there. There's another resident who asked, with additional houses being built, perhaps that's an opportunity to widen the buffer strip. If there's 70 more houses, perhaps widening the buffer strip. So we'll note that comment. A question about, well, I'll read it out. This is from Emma. Will the side walls be in the middle of the driveways like they have been, or will they be placed in the edge of the driveways, allowing for more cars to park in driveways as opposed to the street? And I wonder if Emma's referring to where we sometimes see driveways grouped together and sometimes driveways are separate. But what would be the plan here? Melissa?
Definitely, we will do as many 4-unit townhouse blocks as possible, and we pair the driveways, so it leads to um, more space in between driveways for parking. As well, we do have setbacks that allow for 2 parking spots in the driveway for single detached units, and that's in addition to 2 parking spots in the garage, and then townhouse units as well. We have front yard setbacks that accommodate a vehicle in the driveway as well as vehicle in the garage.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. The pathway, will it continue all the way north to Abbott, or will it zigzag to the existing Caribou Road and Trans-Canada Trail? Will it go all the way north, or will it have another access point at the top of the subdivision?
Really good with the city back when on it, keep in mind that on any land rental pretends to the north of us or between our site and they Tony concludes that but the I mean the thoughts are have one pathway street and a leads the rec center. But I'm for the city on that. But I had a meeting and that's the time.
Yeah, I think some of the pathway connections are still
You're
to
on
be
mute.
determined. Kathy, I don't know if you have any more information on pathways status.
I was just going to say, I can't really add anything more definite than that. As Pierre said, the path would have to go through the NEA lands. So that's something we would look at the time. If Tartan only has the responsibility to do it within their subdivision lands, and then we would look at it beyond there.
There's a question from Tom about safety for kids crossing Fernbank going to school. As Pierre mentioned earlier, there will be a stop sign. It's something we're going to certainly be looking at as we get more detailed, get to a more detailed design phase to see if there's a crosswalk that would be appropriate. I know there's some crossing guards that are other stop signs along Fernbank. This whole stretch of Fernbank, though, has been a concern for me just because of it changes from kind of a rural road into more of a suburban stretch. So I think there's some more work to be done as we get to a more detailed design here. There's a question from Lucas about parks. He noted that there's only one small park proposed, and why is this the case? So why is it that, how do you determine how much park space is appropriate for a piece of land like this? And is there any thought to what the amenities would be at that park at this point?
Yeah, a couple of answers to that. First of all, there are formulas by which parkland dedication amounts or area of land is sort of a proportional direct relationship to the number of units that are being built. But in the Fernbank area as well, in the community design plan area, there's a parks master plan that was completed that looked at the distribution and size and functions of different types of topologies of parks throughout the community, right over towards Terry Fox, of course. And it was determined that the linear park is suitable, of course, because of the desire to extend the Trans-Canada Trail. And I think we're just over a couple of acres, which is a standard for a neighborhood park. And then I know that between our site and Shea Road, there's the adjacent subdivision, and they'll also have a similar size park on their property. But it's really, they do have a full needs assessment, where parks should be distributed and the functions of parks, they should be different from one place to another. It's pretty specific.
Yeah, a lot of that detail.
And that study is available to the public as well.
In terms of the final park design, typically there's an opportunity for public consultation as well. Usually there's 2 or 3 different designs that are proposed. We get feedback from residents about what their needs might be at these local parks, and then that public consultation happens before any construction happens for these parks.
I'd also like to add that because of the increase in units, that we're not asking for additional parkland, but there is a formula, what's called cash in lieu of parkland. So there would be a certain amount of money collected in lieu of parkland for the extra units. So that will be a calculation we'll do. And that money comes and it's spent at 60% spent in the ward and 40% goes to the citywide fund.
Okay, so there's a late question from Lee that you've just answered in terms of the increase in housing. Does it impact the size of the park that is required? So I'm going to, it's 8 o'clock, so we're coming up on our 8 p.m. limit. I see one person with the hand up and one question from Karen. So maybe what we'll do is we'll go to Tom and then Karen, and then we'll wrap things up there. Tom, I'm going to allow you to unmute there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Tom.
I just want to see that, is the traffic study dated? Am I reading the date correct as February 8th, 2021?
Yes,
That's the amendment.
Okay, so the traffic study was done during COVID with 90% of the city working from home. Am I
first of all,
correct?
The February 8th document is an addendum to the original traffic study, and COVID really isn't taken into account. They don't go out there and start counting traffic. It's all modeled, and so the situation of COVID, the temporary situation of COVID, would not have been taken into account. It would have been normal traffic patterns that would have been taken into account. But you raise a really interesting issue because, you know, for example, the OC Transpo, or because OC Transpo isn't running at proper capacity, the city has delayed the master transportation plan. So they are taking into account COVID-related issues, and things may very well change. And we'll be studying what the impacts of those changes are in our communities in the future. But
Because I don't see how adding all the homes and that you're adding, and now you're asking to add 70 more, how you can sit there and say that it's not going to affect the existing traffic patterns.
I didn't say that. I said that in my comment. I said that the traffic engineer concluded that the impacts will be
Minimal.
insignificant. Will be insignificant, and you know, remember, keeping in mind that these roads, these collector roads, are designed to deal with that type of traffic capacity.
Okay, well, because Fernbank is the same Fernbank it was when my family moved to Stittsville in 1985, and now you're looking, you know, 70 additional homes is 140 on average, 140 more cars. And I'd like, just while I'm talking, and it's just one more question, I had asked about the safety for the children going to school, and you, Glenn, you said there was a stop sign. I just want to point out that there's been numerous times that my wife or I walking over to get our kids, we've almost been hit by vehicles, including a school bus.
Oh, absolutely. That stretch of Fernbank is a problem.
Well, of course it is. And now we have a builder, and I'm not against building homes. It's how I make my living. But now we have a builder asking to build more homes and put more traffic on our streets.
We already have an issue.
And there's already an issue there. It's well known.
Yep. And as part of the design stage, this progresses, this is part of the process is looking at that traffic impact from a safety point of view. So I want to make sure when we get there that, you know, considering how people are moving back and forth across Fernbank, that's taken into account.
Okay. Because I heard that in the future they may put lights, and I mean that's not going to do anything in the meantime.
Right. Right. All right. Thank you, Tom. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So the last question, I think it's one that I can answer. It's from Karen. She asked if there's any plan to level or minimize the hill along Fernbank bordering this proposed community just east of the stop sign at Liard, Hartsmere, Fernbank. I know where you mean, Karen. There's not a plan right now. at some point, Fernbank is going to be upgraded. It's a rural road now. At some point, it'll be upgraded to an urban road. And as part of that, they'd be doing a site assessment and environmental assessment and looking at things like that. So it's potential that in the future, when they do that reconstruction, that some leveling out of the road could be possible, but no immediate plans to change that part of Fernbank. I should add, Transportation Committee is coming up next week, and I have a motion there to reduce the speed along Fernbank from 80 to 60. So there's some parts that are 40 in the built-up area, but most of it's 60. Sorry, most of it's 80 currently. I'd like to see anywhere that's 80 brought down to 60, just to recognize it's not a rural road anymore. There's a lot more people using it. There's a bus stop along the stretch right now, more people who are cycling and using it. So that's coming up next week at Transportation Committee. I'll be looking for my city council colleagues to support me on that one. We are through our question queue. There was a lot of questions, a lot of comments. Like I said, I'll be providing a summary of all the questions to Kathy as a planner, so they'll form part of the public record. If we didn't get to your question or didn't answer it to your satisfaction, please send me an email at glenn.gower@ottawa.ca, and I'll follow up with either Melissa, Pierre, or Kathy in order to get you an answer on that. And you can always send your comments if you have further comments to my email as well, or to Kathy Rigas, and you can find all that information on my website at glenngower.ca, or you can search for DevApps on the City of Ottawa website, DevApps, DEVAPPS, and you can find more information about this project and how to contact the various people. So thank you to Kathy and Jeffrey and Melissa and Pierre for being with us tonight. And thank you to the many residents who tuned in either on Zoom or on Facebook. Really good questions and really good comments. And thank you for getting involved and caring about your community. Have a good night.